at WIN, the Worldwide Independent Network. The Worldwide Independent Network connects, supports, and develops music trade associations globally. We have members from 37 different countries, and we are looking to grow as well. I'm here today to talk about Wintel, which is our global market research project. So I have a presentation, which I'm screen sharing now. So what is Wintel? So we've done 3 previous editions of Wintel. We took a break for a few years, but we have done another edition this year, which ended in June, and is being published in the coming months. Unfortunately, we missed the cutoff date for this presentation by a couple of weeks. Otherwise, I would have presented some of the results that we've found for this year. But hopefully I can give you an idea of what Wintel is and why market research is so important. So the key findings in previous years, so we look to measure the size and the economic contribution of the global recorded music sector. So as you can see in previous years, we have market share figures. So the most recent figure was just below 40%, 39.9% for the independent sector. And it showed revenues of $6.9 billion. We are anticipating that figure will be greater for 2021's figures. Here's some more data from previous years. So this graph shows the percentages of different formats. So as you can see, digital grows from 2015 to 2017, whereas physical gets smaller. Again, that's a trend that we expect to continue for 2021's data. So the key areas for previous Wintels and certainly for this year's Wintel are market share, market revenues, employment, looking at formats, looking at unit sales, looking at investment in artists, so how much is invested in A&R, how much is invested in marketing, domestic and international revenues, looking at exports, and finally, specific to this year, we've looked to measure the impact of COVID. So why is market research important? So we have a list of reasons, and I'm going to go through them. So the first reason, I think this is quite a general one, it's to show the strength of the independent community worldwide. I've worked in the independent sector for about 9 years across various roles, and the size of the independent community is usually really underestimated and undervalued. Independent music companies, independent music communities, artists, these tend to be, the power is not concentrated. It's not one big coalition, it's a lot of little companies. And often that can be underestimated and that value cannot be recognized. So I think market research is very important in order to bring all that value together and say, we are here, we exist, and we are strong, and we are united as well. So there are really many reasons why showing that strength and unity is important. Which takes me to arguments for communications of associations, so group groups of companies and individual companies. So commercial partners for the independent sector, and governments, which has become more important with the pandemic, are often unaware of the size and contribution of the sector. We've seen this with new platforms coming into play. So digital platforms, they often know, if we want a major company, we know they have 20-30% market share. For the independents, it's not so clear how large the independents are. So just having that data available makes it a lot clearer who we are and why we deserve a seat at the table. And in terms of local and federal governments, we've seen this time and time again across the world, where we've produced data and we've taken this data to local governments. I think Australia was a good example a few years ago, and they really had no idea how large the independent community was. So it's kind of like a proof of concept. It's kind of like it shows the strength of the sector when you can present data that says we are this big, and it earns you a seat at the table and legitimacy. And as it says on the slide, data is one of the most powerful tools you have to aid that greater level of understanding. I touched upon this in my previous point, but arguments for the development of governmental programs. Governments usually have quite a limited understanding of the music industry and the difference between independent companies, major companies, the challenges faced by different parts of the industry. And I think having market research, having data that quantifies how big the sector is, how much revenues have fallen during COVID, for example, can be really helpful for governments to understand without doing more than reading a few pieces of paper, I guess. So yeah, as it says on the slide as well, data can identify areas of growth, areas that need investment, areas that need support. We've seen all of that over the past few years. The next point is positioning the independent sector as a strong content partner for new services. One of the things that we've found looking at various data over the last few years is independent music tends to over-index on most DSPs, on most streaming services. So the share of independent music might be 20%, but you might get, let's say, 30% of the plays. I think it's very important to showcase that strength, to show these platforms that independent music is what consumers are listening to, and it should be respected. It should be high on your priorities list when you're going out to get licenses from music companies. And again, I think demonstrating this is really important via data, and it helps with the negotiations of the sector. Which brings me on to Merlin. So WIN's market research data is shared with Merlin, and giving Merlin better data that shows the size and the economic contribution of the sector is beneficial for Merlin's negotiations with digital partners. Merlin have deals with most of the top streaming services, from Spotify to Apple Music, and so on. So it increases their leverage, and it increases the value proposition, really, of independent music. And I touched upon this a little bit earlier, but it helps associations and individual companies with their COVID recovery strategy. So measuring the impact of the pandemic really helps to demonstrate the need for assistance from either from other parts of the sector or from the government. And assistance can be targeted to those most at need. With our work, we really oversee the whole world, and we've seen very different approaches to supporting the music and creative industries in different countries. There are some countries where there has been very little to no support. There are some countries where there's been a great deal of support from the government. I think Germany and Canada are good examples of really good support. And one of the first things that they had to do in Germany was to get data on just how big the impact of the pandemic was and which areas of the industry were impacted, because not all areas were negatively impacted. In a lot of territories, streaming saw significant growth because people were at home and they had more time to listen to music. But obviously, the live side of the industry was really badly affected. Companies that depend on developing new artists, that depend on getting people into record stores, were affected by the shutdowns. So really measuring how big the impact is and where the impact is has been very helpful to the recovery strategy. With this year's Wintel, it was a 3 year. It was 3 years of data that we were asking for, and the reason for that was firstly because we hadn't done Wintel for a number of years, but more importantly, it was so we could measure the differences between 2019 and the pandemic year of 2020. So in terms of the results that we're expecting from Wintel 2021, we're expecting to know the size of the independent market worldwide and country by country. We're expecting to see how markets have developed from 2018 to 2020. As I said a moment ago, it'll be very interesting to see the difference between 2019 and 2020 in particular. We'll get to see how our data compares to other sectors of the music industry. So IFPI data, for example, and RIAA data in the US, in the UK it would be BPI. Most countries have a body which mostly represents the major labels. But the importance of having independent data alongside the IFPI data is a lot of the reporting for the IFPI data includes independent revenues that are distributed through major companies, which you could say it artificially inflates the major labels' market shares. For our data, if it comes from an independent music company, we've welcomed them to include it, regardless of regardless of whether it's distributed by a major. So that will produce very interesting data that you really can't get anywhere else in the industry. Strengths and weaknesses of the independent sector. From the charts I showed earlier, it's clear that physical music is going down and digital is going up. We anticipate that the results for this year will show again that streaming has continued to grow very strongly. We don't know how strongly yet. We haven't received the data. We anticipate that vinyl will be up. We anticipate that CDs will be slightly down. I think a lot of independent labels, especially in some markets across the world, still have very robust CD businesses. But really, our survey looks at a lot of different business areas. So through the regional data, through the global data, we will be able to identify trends, and these will be fed back locally to the associations in each country. Indications for the development of the sector and of various business areas. If you just have one company's data, it doesn't really tell you much. If you have 30 or 40 or 50 companies in a smaller market, you really get an idea of which areas on a wider scale are seeing growth, and which areas maybe aren't seeing growth. COVID, the extent to which the market has both benefited from COVID aid and suffered from COVID impacts. In terms of the impacts of COVID, some of the questions that we asked companies: did you pause investments in artists? Did you pause hiring new employees? How did it affect your business? So it's going to be really interesting to see what those impacts are. And once you know what the impacts are, that data can be used, as I mentioned earlier, to better inform governments of the impacts and hopefully get some support. And that's pretty much it with market research. We're going to be publishing the Wintel 2021 report before the end of this year. So keep an eye on our website, winformusic.org. It will be available to the public. And we are intending to do Wintel in future years. All independent music rights holders are welcome to participate. So thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, you can get in touch with me at the email address listed. And yes, thank you for your time, and thank you again to IMX for the invitation to speak today.